Welcome to the video, guys. We got more reports coming out of the EU in relation to our trade deal with them, or the attempt at negotiating a trade deal anyway, because it seems the EU are not actually going for a free trade agreement in the normal sense of the word. You know, the one like we're going for with America, or that they have with Canada, Japan, and numerous other countries. As we all know, the EU are demanding special treatment and control over our laws and regulations, which obviously cannot be allowed to happen. Well, it seems David Frost, our chief negotiator, has come out and absolutely destroyed the EU and Michel Barnier's position on said trade deal, along with pointing out what the EU is demanding is not something that no democratic country would ever sign. So, not only has he completely destroyed their arguments in the article we're going to look at here, but he's also showing the world the undemocratic nature of the European Union, pointing out, as I said, no democratic country would sign the FTA that they want. It's more like a document to become the vassal state of the EU, much like Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP want at the moment. But the Express article headlines, Barnier left red-faced as UK negotiator David Frost destroys EU argument in 3 points. David Frost pulled no punches in his letter to the EU's top negotiating team as the UK published its terms for a free trade agreement with the bloc in a move to ramp up pressure on Brussels to back down over its demands. It comes after the third round of talks between UK and EU negotiators, charged with thrashing out post-Brexit trade terms, once again ended in stalemate this week, which we already know and I covered at the time. In a 4-page letter to his EU counterpart, Mr Barnier, Mr Frost highlighted a number of areas where his team thought Brussels was not acting in good faith during the talks, which I think you'll find will probably be most areas. In 3 bullet points, he perfectly highlighted a series of contradictions in the EU's claims using previous agreements as examples. He said the UK found it perplexing that the EU was continuing to make unbalanced and unprecedented demands, but argued rapid progress could be made if the bloc was willing to offer terms similar to those in free trade agreements it had already ratified with third countries such as Canada and Japan, like I said earlier. He said, overall, at this moment in negotiations, what is on offer is not a fair free trade relationship between close economic partners, but a relatively low-quality trade agreement coming with unprecedented EU oversight of our laws and institutions, which is essentially what he had with the Maybot deal. And if they had their way, we would have already been signed up to long ago. It does not have to be like this, he said. I remain convinced that it would be very straightforward for us to agree a modern and high-quality FTA and other separate agreements, like those you have agreed with other close partners around the world, and that we could do so quickly, which is kind of obvious, but we all know the EU wants a hell of a lot more. They cannot function without us essentially being part of the European Union, which is what their demands really boil down to. It's essentially keeping us as a member state while not being a member state. Mr Frost also called out the EU on 3 arguments it has used to justify its proposals for a future relationship with the UK. He said that the EU is claiming that the UK is being offered a future relationship of unprecedented depth. However, Mr Frost hit back saying this is not obvious on the basis of the evidence we have so far, saying there must be mutual commitment to zero tariffs. Mr Frost said the EU has used a level of economic integration between the UK and the EU to justify its demands, but the UK Brexit negotiator argued, as a share of our economy, the UK is already less integrated in trade terms with the EU than Switzerland, Norway or Ukraine. So, once again, completely rubbishing the EU's argument there. Which is no surprise, the EU's argument is nonsensical. They are just, like I've said, absolutely desperate to try and get the most they can out of the UK because they are fully aware that they were struggling before the situation occurred that we find ourselves in now. So, them trying to take us to the cleaners should be a surprise to absolutely no one. He points out that the EU did not insist that the US made any level playing field commitments in the TTIP negotiations beyond those typical to an FTA, although US and UK trade flows with the EU are roughly similar, once again pointing out the fact the EU is not acting in good faith and are just trying to protect themselves by demanding nonsensical things from us that would obviously help them and be a detriment to this country, along with, of course, going against what 17.4 million people voted for in 2016. The desperation of the EU is so plain to see for everyone now, it's actually incredible. In his third and final point, he said the EU claim that the provisions are required on the grounds of proximity. But Mr. Frost said this was a novel argument and one the UK could not accept in the 21st century. He said the US and Canada, for example, trade together through a trade agreement without provisions of the kind the EU would like to see, as I'm sure do most countries around the world. The proximity argument amounts to saying that a country in Europe cannot expect to determine its own rules simply on the grounds of geography and that it must bend to the EU's norms, which is something the EU wishes was the case. Our negotiating team appear to be showing them that is not the way it goes when you have a government that actually plans to do what the people of this country asked for in relation to this matter, of course, because they won't do it for most things, that is for sure. The letter comes after the UK published its terms for a free trade agreement with the EU. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove told MPs the government had decided to make public the UK's draft legal text, with a 291-page draft comprehensive free trade agreement among the 12 documents. Meanwhile, International Trade Secretary Liz Truss also published the tariff schedule the UK would operate at the end of the transition period for those countries with whom the UK does not have a free trade agreement. And she also pointed out how well the UK-US trade deal was going. Sticking points include disagreements over how fishing access will work after the transition period ends in December, and the bloc's call for Britain to continue following level playing field arrangements, essentially remaining in the European Union. Making the UK's proposition public on a host of topics ranging from energy to law enforcement means all of the EU 27 member states will be able to see the offer on the table, not just the European Commission, which is conducting the talks. And that, my friends, is how you circumvent the undemocratic European Commission. You release it to the public and allow member states of the EU to take a look at it for themselves. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's official spokesman said the documents were published as a constructive contribution to the negotiations and to ensure they were available to all and so that the Commission can share the text with the member states. But the spokesman added, "We are not seeking to negotiate directly with member states and never have. No, you are just showing them what is on offer so they can apply pressure to the EU if they find the EU is not acting in their best interests and instead is acting in the best interests of itself and the snivelling shit weasels in Brussels." So it would seem if any of this is true, the EU literally does not have a leg to stand on when it comes to its demands in relation to this free trade agreement. And with any sort of luck, they continue on this hardline stance for a few more weeks now, I think it's 5 or 6, until the extension deadline passes, when it will literally mean the EU will have to give us a free trade agreement by December, otherwise we're gone on WTO terms. Which I'm sure you will all agree will send every single Ramona and EU cumbucket in to complete shitfits. We will be swimming in salty Ramona tears. We will have 2 Christmases in December. Now before I go, I've started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you would like to come and join me for a live stream to chat in real time, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or just want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link will be down in the video description below and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now as always, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.